Okay.
अपने मौला की मैं जोगन बानी रे अपने मौला की मैं जोगन
On December 23, 2019, the new memorial tower was inaugurated at Mehrabad. It was the 75th anniversary of the foundation laying ceremony of the site, which Meher Baba dedicated to those departed ones who played an important role in his life and work. During the last 23 years of his life, Baba occasionally added names to the list of persons to be included in the memorial tower, which came to 355 when he dropped his body. This is the story of one of those of the original list from 1944. Kaikushru Masa was the husband of Sunamasi and the father of Korshed, who were both close women disciples of Meher Baba. Kaikushru Behram Irani, born in 1880 in Bombay, was the oldest of 4 children in his family. When he was 15 years old, his father died, and being the eldest son, he inherited the responsibility of supporting his mother and siblings by running the family liquor business. Spiritually inclined by nature, he had no interest in such things, but he diligently carried out his duties. About a year later, his mother and sister traveled to Ahmednagar to arrange his marriage, as per the custom common in those days. After meeting the 2 sisters, Gul and Suna, both parties came to an agreement for the engagement. Sometime later, however, after returning to Bombay, Kaikushru's sister realized that she had misunderstood which sister was which. She had assumed that the older sister, who was taller, was the one to be engaged. Suna was smaller and younger, only 12 years old at the time, and she had a darker complexion. Gul was already engaged, and this was the same year that she was married to another Kaikushru in Ahmednagar. For some years, our Bombay Kaikushru's family hesitated in keeping the commitment of marriage to Suna, but Kaikushru became exasperated and eventually declared, "I have given my word to this woman and I will keep my promise." After they were married, around 1906 or 7, Suna began staying with Kaikushru in his joint family home. But her husband's family resented her, and they made Suna feel unwelcome. It is interesting that Suna's sister Gul received the same treatment from much of her husband's family. They were treated like servants rather than family. All this made Kaikushru sad, reinforcing his longing to be free from worldly life so that he could focus on God. He began buying lottery tickets, hoping to win enough money to free himself from worldly responsibility, but of course he never won, and Suna urged him to stop wasting his money. A son named Erich was born to them. However, after a year or so, he got sick and died, and naturally, this was heartbreaking for them. One day, a Muslim friend asked Kaikushru why he always seemed so sad. After Kaikushru revealed his feelings, his friend told him that there was a way that he could achieve both God and wealth, but it required great bravery and determination. He told him about the Chila Nashini, the very difficult practice of sitting inside a circle the aspirant has drawn on the ground for 40 days without eating or sleeping, drinking only water and a little milk, constantly repeating the name of God. The friend also prescribed a certain prayer he advised Kaikushru to repeat. Kaikushru's response was very enthusiastic. He was confident that he could exercise his strong will and succeed. After making arrangements for the shop, he went home and informed Suna about his intention to begin that very day. He chose a spot in a small room in their home and began sitting. He passed through the days, which included the occasional terrifying hallucinations typical to the Chilla. After 38 days, he was unable to keep himself awake any longer, and he lost himself to sleep. At some point, he had a very vivid dream in which Lakshmi Devi, the Hindu goddess of wealth and beauty, came to him with a baby in her arms. She said, "This baby is for you. Take her." Kaikushru replied, "No, I don't want a baby." "Then why are you sitting in the circle? What do you want?" "I just want to win the lottery. I want wealth so that I can be free of responsibility and devote myself to the spiritual life." Lakshmi Devi asserted, "No, this is your lottery. If you want money and spiritual fulfillment, then you must take this baby. She will bring you everything. What you want, you will receive through her." Kaikushru wasn't sure what to do, but how could he refuse the goddess? So he reached out to take the baby, and when he touched her, he was amazed to see that his hands and arms were turning to silver. As Lakshmi Devi placed the baby in his arms, he became enamored with the girl's beauty and charm, and he asked, "What is her name?" "Korshed Banu," replied Lakshmi Devi, and she added, "Now remember, you have to take care of her every need and give her every comfort. Make sure that she is always happy, never sad or worried. If you do this, you will receive all that you have longed for through her." And with that, Lakshmi Devi disappeared and the dream ended. Kaikushru woke up assuming that he had just had one last hallucination, discouraged that he had come so far only to fail. Since there was no point in sitting there any longer, he got up and left the house to walk, getting his body to move again. While Kaikushru was out walking, he happened to meet an acquaintance who seemed to be suddenly struck by the quality of Kaikushru's character. The man asked Kaikushru to become his partner in a jewelry shop, saying, "I have 11 employees, but I need a trustworthy and competent partner to help me run the place." Kaikushru accepted the man's offer, and he gave the family liquor shop to his brother. Before opening the jewelry shop for business each morning, Kaikushru would perform puja to Lakshmi Devi's picture, and he would treat people from all different religions and castes the same, greeting them with hands joined in respect. This behavior was especially unusual for Zoroastrians and frowned upon by the Orthodox. However, after Kaikushru joined the business, it began to flourish. Suna became pregnant again, and on May 2nd, 1910, a baby girl was born to them. As per the custom, after 10 days, Kaikushru and Suna consulted a Zoroastrian astrologer to find out what the child's name should be. When they were told Korshed Banu, Kaikushru immediately remembered his dream with Lakshmi Devi and realized that this was the baby that she had given him. Kaikushru and Suna always considered Korshed to be a gift directly from God. Kaikushru quickly became very skillful in designing and working jewelry, and as the business thrived, he was able to take more time to pursue his spiritual interests. Among the different spiritually advanced persons he began to visit were the 5 perfect masters of the age. By 1914, he was occasionally visiting Sai Baba at Shirdi. There, he also met Sai's most important disciple, Upasni Maharaj. In 1917, Upasni Maharaj shifted his seat from the Khandaba temple in Shirdi to the nearby village of Sakuri. It was after a visit to Maharaj there that year that Kaikushru came home and reported to his wife and daughter about the exceptional young Persian he met who was so devoted to Upasni Maharaj. His name was Merwan, and it was obvious that he was Maharaj's favorite. Kaikushru experienced a deep inner recognition of Merwan's divinity. Within a year, Kaikushru brought Suna and Korshed to Sakuri to meet Upasni Maharaj for the first time. And though the village was still very primitive then, they were deeply inspired by the divine atmosphere there. Kaikushru also encouraged Suna's sister Gul, who was despondent about worldly life, to visit Upasni Maharaj. Gul did visit Sakuri for the first time in 1919 and instantly became deeply devoted to Upasni Maharaj and his favorite disciple, Merwan. During a visit to Sakuri in January of 1921, Merwan informed Gul and her friend Pila that their roles in this life were to be his spiritual mother and spiritual sister, respectively. From then on, they were known as Gulmai and Pilamai. By that time, devotees began referring to Merwan as Meher Baba. Gulmai's children were also devoted to the masters, and they referred to Kaikushru and Suna as Kaikushru Masa and Suna Masi. Masi means mother-sister, and Masa is her husband. Because there were 3 Kaikushrus in that family group alone, Baba also began to refer to them as Kaikushru Masa and Suna Masi, which were also terms of respect. In May of 1922, Baba asked many devotees to come to Sakuri to celebrate Upasni Maharaj's birthday. Sunamasi and Korshed traveled there and finally met Meher Baba for the first time. This was when Upasni Maharaj gathered so many of them in a new hall to explain that Merwan was perfect and that they should stick to him throughout their lives, no matter what anyone said about him, including Maharaj himself. To pacify his siblings, Kaikushru Masa did not attend Upasni Maharaj's birthday function. By now, his family had become very suspicious of his involvement with these spiritual masters. As was typical with orthodox-minded people, they regarded the integration of all castes and religions around these masters as an insult to their own religion. To them, another proof of Meher Baba's being a charlatan was his young age. How could he be a spiritual master? According to their tradition, Merwan should have been bowing down to them because they were from an older generation. Within a few weeks, Baba established his first ashram, Manzil-e-Mim, in Bombay, not too far from where Kaikushru Masa and the family stayed. Soon, Kaikushru Masa was asked to attend the arti every morning at Manzil-e-Mim and to return in the evening after his business hours. Sunamasi was invited to come whenever she had time, and Korshed was allowed to come after school hours. One day during the Manzil-e-Mim period, Kaikushru Masa came to Baba with a steel safe box. He placed the box at Baba's feet and said, "Please accept this from me, Baba. I am very happy to lay this at your feet. Kindly accept this, and Suna and Korshed as well. I give them both to you for your service." Baba just nodded, but when the box was opened, he was surprised and said, "These are very nice, but what am I going to do with all these jewels?" So Kaikushru asked, "What would you like me to do?" Baba replied, "Sell all this jewelry and bring me the money. Then I can use it for my work." So Kaikushru Masa went to shops in the bazaar and sold all this jewelry that he had personally crafted for Suna and Korshed over the years. However, Kaikushru Masa's workmanship was very fine, a unique style that was undeniably his, and eventually his business partner and family realized that he had pawned this wealth to no doubt give to Meher Baba. The result was an intensification of suspicion and animosity by these people against Meher Baba, which would torture Kaikushru Masa for the rest of his life. After 10 months, Baba closed the Manzalimim ashram and traveled to Ahmednagar to attend the wedding of Gulmai's eldest son, Rustam, and Mera's sister, Freni. Gulmai and Sunamasi's brother was also opposed to Baba, and because of slander spread by him and others, souring the atmosphere at the family's quarters where Baba and the Mandali were staying, Baba abruptly walked away on the morning of May 4th, 1923, with the Mandali running to catch up to him. That was when Baba first came to the former POW camp that would soon be named Mehrabad. After 5 weeks in the Ahmednagar area, Baba left with a group of disciples to travel through the north on to Quetta. Sunamasi and Korshed were included in the group, but Kaikushru Masa's family would not allow him to leave Bombay. He was so distraught that he became nauseous and couldn't eat, and his health began to deteriorate. After they returned from this trip north, Baba ordered Suna and Korshed to stay in Ahmednagar until further notice. He told them, even if the sky falls, don't leave Ahmednagar. Quite a drama ensued, with Kaikushru Masa's family sending telegrams that he was dying and that they should return to Bombay immediately. But they quietly obeyed Baba's order. When Baba returned a few weeks later, he was pleased and embraced them. He told them, I'm very happy with you. If you had broken my order, Kaikushru would have died, but now he won't. You saved him by obeying my instructions. At the end of 1923, Kaikushru, Suna, and Korshed moved into a spacious apartment that Baba had been staying in, not far from the Dadar station in Bombay. Away from their joint family, Baba and the Mandali could now visit them more freely whenever they were in Bombay. Sunamasi and Korshed traveled to Mehrabad for the celebration of Upasi Maharaja's birthday around the newly constructed Jyopti in May of 1924. But once again, Kaikushru Masa could not attend due to the anti-Meher Baba oppression from his family, which continued to adversely affect his health by causing him high blood pressure. At the age of 14, beginning in August of 1924, Korshed became one of the first few women to come and stay with Meher Baba as a resident disciple in Ahmednagar and then at Mehrabad in the post office building. Baba often stayed with Kaikushru and Suna whenever he was in Bombay. On January 25, 1925, Baba returned to Mehrabad and began what is referred to as the first long stay. By the end of March, Baba had opened the Meher Charitable Hospital and Dispensary and the Hazrat Babajan School, offering high-quality medical care and education at no cost, mostly for the impoverished local people. Much of the activity over this 22-month period was funded by Kaikushru Masa's generous gift from the sale of his jewelry. 3 days after Meher Baba began observing his long silence on July 10, 1925, he also began writing a secret book that he explained contained spiritual information never before revealed. To keep his writing work safe and secure, Baba kept it in the steel safe box that had held Kaikushru Masa's jewelry, which had been given 3 years before. During the 17 months Baba was writing his book, he kept the key to the safe box on a string around his own neck. A few of the Mandali generally held responsibility for this box. Sometimes one of them would secure it to their wrist with a lock and chain. According to Baba's direction, the box with the book traveled around the world through the years. The safe box is now kept at Merazad along with so many other treasured artifacts. Due to Kaikushru Masa's fragile health, he and Sunamasi only visited Mehrabad occasionally during the first long stay. But after the colder months in the beginning of 1927, Baba asked them to come and stay at Mehrabad. The Mandalay built a simple hut of the usual temporary construction for Kaikushru Masa and Sunamasi near the old bathroom building where the 5 close women disciples were residing at that time. Kaikushru Masa served as one of the night watchmen who would call out, "All is well," during the night. This was during the second long stay when the Meher and Prem ashrams flourished at Mehrabad. Mani told us the story of one day when she was sitting with Kaikushru Masa in his hut. To keep Mani occupied, Kaikushru Masa gave her prayer beads and showed her how to quietly repeat Baba's name, as he would do. She was doing this for some time when an unseen scorpion stung her. It's a very painful experience. Mani howled and cried, "How could Baba let a scorpion sting me when I was repeating his name?" Kaikushru Masa calmed her by telling her, "Oh, but Baba sent the scorpion with a special message just for you. Did Baba send it to sting Korshed?" "No," Mani answered through her tears. "Did Baba send it to Naja?" "No, not even to Mera." Oh, Mani thought, and even at her young age, she bravely bore the pain for that day. On December 20th, 1927, Baba began staying in seclusion in his crypt cabin on the hill. Only a few of the men Mandali and a few of the advanced boys were invited into the cabin during that seclusion. Kaikushru Masa reported to Baba there every morning at 7 a.m. Since the close women could rarely see Baba then, they devised a plan to get his attention by sending garlands and crowns of local fresh flowers up to him with Kaikushru Masa. This photograph shows Baba sitting in the crypt cabin one day in January of 1928 with 2 of the advanced boys. He is wearing flowers that Kaikushru Masa brought for him. In June of that year, Baba moved the complete colony of Mehrabad, hundreds of residents, to Toka for 6 months. The women's compound there was surrounded by a barricade of woven bamboo. The only man permitted inside the women's compound was Kaikushru Masa, since he had a pure and innocent nature, according to Baba. But because it was monsoon season and Toka was on the river, Kaikushru Masa's health suffered again, and he had to return to Bombay in early September for better medical care. In Bombay, the friction with the family over Meher Baba continued. Kaikushru's siblings had taken his assets and locked them in a bank vault while he was away to prevent him from giving anything more to Baba. They doled out small amounts as an allowance to live on. It was 6 months before Rustam could take them back to Mehrabad to see Baba. Baba advised them to spend the summer in Mahabaleshwar. After returning from a trip to Quetta in May, Baba called them to meet him at Mehrabad on June 1st. Kaikushru Masa cried like a child to see Baba again, pouring out his heart to tell about his failing health, the trouble his family was giving them, and such. Baba consoled him and assured him, "Do as I say and leave this to me. All will be well. Meanwhile, don't worry at all. I will see to everything." When Kaikushru Masa returned 2 days later, Baba proposed that Rustam be made Masa's power of attorney, and that he, Sunamasi and Korshed moved to Nasik, where most of the other Mandali were staying at the time. Baba advised him about his diet and rest and ordered him to walk for half an hour every day, but that he must always be accompanied by someone. Kaikushru Masa was very much relieved to have Baba's care and practical direction. Baba wanted to take a few of the Mandali and Prem Ashram boys with him to Kashmir in July of 1929. A special bus body, as per Baba's design, had to be built, so Padri was sent to Bombay to pick up the chassis and necessary material for the body. At the same time, Rustam had brought Kaikushru Masa there, and on July 3rd, before Padri left driving the new bus chassis to Nasik, as much of Kaikushru Masa's furniture and luggage as could be carried was also loaded onto the vehicle. It was clear to Kaikushru Masa's extended family that they might be losing their grip of control over his life. Soon, his sister visited Nasik and casually asked Suna and Kaikushru about their activities, when they went for the daily walk, and where they would go. On July 28th, while Baba was in Kashmir, Kaikushru and Suna were taking the daily walk to Sarosh Motor Works when Suna suddenly became ill and had to return home. Not thinking about the detail of Baba's order to never walk alone, Kaikushru continued on. That day, however, as he came near Sarosh Motor Works, his two brothers and his business partner were waiting with a taxi. They told him that he would be coming with them to Bombay. When he protested, the three of them grabbed him and physically forced him into the car. One of the workers saw this, but assumed that Kaikushru Masa had become ill and that the men were bringing him home. It was only some hours later that everyone realized what had happened. The next evening, a telegram came. "I am in Bombay. Don't worry about me. I am safe." Everyone knew that it was sent by Kaikushru's family. Kanseb Kaikushru and Rustam advised Sunamasi and Korshed to go to Bombay to fight for their wealth, knowing that Kaikushru Masa's siblings and business partner would pressure him into signing away his interests. But before going to Kashmir, Baba had given the three of them an order not to leave Nasik, even if the sky was falling. And the way life was with Baba, these personal orders were generally kept quiet, so no one could understand why Suna and Korshed didn't rush off to Bombay in an attempt to rescue Kaikushru Masa. When Baba returned to Nasik on August 26th, he called Suna and Korshed and asked them why they hadn't gone to Bombay. He wanted to hear them tell him that they were following his order not to leave. Baba was pleased and told them, "Don't worry about anything. From now on, I will look after you." In Bombay, Kaikushru Masa had been taken to his sister's house and was being kept captive in a small room there. His family and business partner were pressuring him to sign a new will that they had prepared, relinquishing Rustam as power of attorney and signing over all his possessions to them. Except for a small monthly allowance, Korshed would be eliminated as a beneficiary unless she agreed to marry. Day after day, Kaikushru Masa adamantly refused, as they just waited, having nothing to lose. After weeks of harassment, he agreed to sign, provided they added one condition to the will. If his wife or daughter ever needed medical care or hospitalization, they should have whatever money they required to cover doctor's fees, medicines, and other expenses. Other than this, Kaikushru Masa's wealth was divided in parts to go to his siblings and business partner. Even after he signed the new will, however, Kaikushru Masa was not released by his family. The law stated that whenever a living trust was altered, it was valid only if it remained unchanged for 1 year. So to prevent Kaikushru Masa from revoking the new will, his family kept him prisoner for an additional year. After a year had passed, they told him that he could return to Nasik if he agreed to sign a short letter that they would dictate to Suna and Korshed. It read, "If you believe in God, then come and take me from here as soon as you can." Of course, the letter was shown to Baba, who told Korshed, "Now go and bring your father back." When Sunamasi and Korshed went to take Kaikushru Masa away from his sister's place, they didn't so much as take a drink of water from his family. They saw the room where he had been kept all that time. Korshed said, "My father was treated worse than a prisoner in jail by his own relatives." It had affected his heart, and he looked very frail. Though he was very weak, the three of them returned to Nasik immediately by train. The stress of Kaikushru Masa's many months of hardship had also caused mental exhaustion. Seeing his wife and daughter, he was very depressed about what his relatives had forced him to do. He would often weep and ask Suna and Korshed to forgive him for losing what he intended to be theirs. Sunamasi would console him, telling him to forget it all now and try to be happy. Baba was very attentive to his care and treatment, visiting him every day while he was in Nasik. After a few months, Kaikushru Masa contracted pneumonia. During that time, Baba was often away, so he asked Pilamai to look after Kaikushru Masa. Baba ordered Sunamasi and Korshed not to nurse him or be too near him because it made him feel so bad whenever he saw his wife and daughter. He would start to cry, which aggravated his condition. One day, Kaikushru Masa's condition became very serious. That very night, Baba returned to Nasik at 2 a.m. and went straight to Kaikushru Masa's room, sitting with him for a long time. Baba spread his own bedding on the veranda outside the room so that he could look in on him from time to time. No one else was allowed into the room then. Baba reassured Kaikushru Masa, "Don't worry, just remember me." On January 18th, 1931, Baba sat in the room next to Kaikushru Masa's and asked Sunamasi and Korshed to press his feet. With the door between the rooms open so that Masa could hear from his bed, Baba asked Korshed to sing all the songs he taught her that he had composed before he started keeping silence. About 1 o'clock, Pilamai called out, "Baba, now he is going." Baba went into the other room to be with him, which was unusual. Generally, Baba would not go near someone who was dying. Baba caressed him as Pilamai interpreted, "Masaji, I am here with you, don't worry." As Korshed continued singing, Kaikushru Masa took his last breath while Baba held him like a child. Baba came to Suna and Korshed and told them, "He died in my arms, so don't worry. He is in a very good place now and is fine. Don't worry about him and don't cry." Baba sat back in the chair and had Korshed lay her head on his lap as he consoled them. "Don't cry." Sunamasi and Korshed were not worried, yet they deeply felt Kaikushru Masa's passing. Later in 1933, when Baba had Pendu construct the kitchen for the new women's ashram on Mehrabad Hill, a room was made to accommodate Baba and his bed. This fine old teakwood bed was the last thing Kaikushru Masa had left to give to Baba. In the early years, another saintly veteran of the Chilanashini, Baba's own father Sheriarji, visited Kaikushru Masa in Bombay. As they sat on this bed, Sheriarji narrated his years of wandering through the wilderness in search of God. Baba didn't stay many nights in this room because of the proximity to the women's ashram and his need for a watchman. His bed was soon shifted to the crypt room and later to his cabin near there in 1935. But since this room was built to accommodate his bed, it is now kept there. It stands as a memorial to the great love and sacrifice of one of Meher Baba's early disciples. Kaikushru Masa's life was an example of the annihilation that a real spiritual life can bring. All things must pass, but the benefit from loss because of real love is never lost.
अपने मौला की मैं जोगन बानी रे अपने मौला की मैं जोगन बानी रे जोगन बानी मैं बैरागन बन की मैं जोगन बानी रे अपने मौला की मैं जोगन बानी रे जोगन बानी मैं बैरागन.
Jai Baba. Wow, Peter, thank you so much. You just brought such a beautiful story to life for us.
Well, good morning again. It's wonderful to see you all fast becoming old friends.
Oh, sorry.
It hasn't been very long in time in this incarnation, but somehow there
This is
a
something
kinship,
else that must have come up right after
among
the
all of
video.
us. And
Sorry. It was the next video after yours on the YouTube site. So sorry. Thank you for sharing such a beautiful story. You just brought it to life, Peter. I know there had been some time set aside for discussion about Kaikushru Masa. If anybody has anything that they'd like to speak to Peter about or bring forward, this is a good time for that discussion of Kaikushru Masa. So if you want to raise your hands digitally, I'll put it in the chat. There is a little reaction button that has a hand raise function, or you can hit Alt-Y on a PC, Option-Y on a Mac. So if anybody has any questions or comments for Peter?
I'd like to tell you a little more concerning the family in Korshed, Sunamasi. You know, they lived with Baba at Mehrabad the following years, and Korshed still had some of her valuable saris from her younger days there in Bombay, stored in her aunt's house, and occasionally she felt like maybe her aunt had remorse for the way she had treated Kaikushru Masa. So occasionally, once every few years, she would request her aunt to send her a sari, a special sari or something. The aunt, whose name was Motibai, didn't know what it was for, but these are the things that Korshed would take apart, all this fine fabric and all the gold thread and all that. Korshed would take these things apart, and the women at Mehrabad, Mera, Korshed, Mani, the others, would use these materials to make those beautiful pieces of art jewelry with Baba's hair and nails also. So all of those things came from there. It's not the end of the story also, in the sense that in the 1960s early, Motibai, Kaikushru Masa's sister, was old and infirm, and Baba asked Korshed and Sunamasi to go and stay with her and take care of her. Can you imagine that? So they did. For some years, they took care of Kaikushru Masa's sister, who had treated him so badly. And she lived in that apartment that Baba had initially rented from the family, and then had Korshed, had Kaikushru Masa and the family lived there from the end of 1923. So that's where Motibai was staying. So Motibai, in gratitude, wanted to give them something. So she left the apartment to Sunamasi and Korshed so they could stay there for the rest of their lives, which really irritated the rest of the family still. Now, there was another relative who lived in the apartment next door. It was all the same building. The name of it was Tafti Mansion or Irani Mansions. It was known as that. And I arrived there one day in the 70s, and Korshed looked very down, and she had a bandage on her head. I said, "What happened?" She said, "My cousin attacked me there next door. My cousin, she hit me over the head. She had to have so many stitches on her head. I mean, she's now in her old age, and she's still going through this stuff." It was amazing. So right to the grave, this thing happens, you know? It's fate, it's destiny. The thing we have to remember is there's a difference in the Avatar Circle people. Their balance sheet of impressions is used by him in his work, integrated in his work, to give them also something more than just liberation. So it's a good example of how that family gave everything and suffered. Antithetical to Western, or all over the world now, religious materialism, where because the religious materialism comes from a wrong beliefs, shallow theology, where you believe that this life is it, and then there's one more thing you're going to earn. And anyway, I'm not going to get distracted with that theology, but let's then go on to Sheriarji.
Whenever you're ready, I'll bring the pictures up, Peter.
Okay. Well, I'll just begin by giving you a little bit of a geopolitical background in Iran and India during that period. You know, first of all, there were Zoroastrians who left Iran centuries ago when there was an initial persecution of them by the Muslims in Iran. So they went to India, where they were accepted by the king of Gujarat and allowed and encouraged to practice their own religion. So India became a place of refuge for Zoroastrians then. Those people who came early and mixed with Gujarati people in India are known as Parsis, Persians. In India, they're known as Parsis. In the early part of the 19th century, there was a fundamentalist Muslim revival, which was basically a reaction to European colonialism in the Sunni majority area of Arabia. It manifested as the philosophy of what we call Wahhabi Islam, which also pressured the minority Shiite people in Iran. And they reacted by having their own revival, which basically was to persecute Zoroastrians again. So this was happening in the early part of the 18th century. Of course, all of this is a typical atmosphere that happens before an avataric advent. It is part of the natural degeneration of religious traditions by humanity that causes a need for righteousness. So in this atmosphere of persecution in the middle of the 19th century, we begin our story. Now let's look at the family tree. We're going to look at Shariar's family tree. I don't know if you can see this very well. I suppose we'll start here. Okay. Mundegar and Mosaldun were married sometime in the 1840s. Their first child was a girl, Peroja. She was the eldest. Actually, the second child was Kodadad. But I put Sheriar and Shireen here because it's easier to read this chart if we descend from Kodadad on the right side and Peroja on the left side. We've done Baba's family tree in 3 pages to make it a little easier to follow. There was a youngest brother who lived in Calcutta, but we don't even know what his name was. So Shariar, you can see, was born March 21st, 1853. That's a date that's easy for the Iranis to remember because that is the Persian New Year, Jamshedi Nowroz. So he was born on that day in 1853. Now, the difference between Mundegar and others is that he was not a typical Orthodox Zoroastrian in Iran. He was spiritually inclined. So he followed one of the local Sufi walis in the Yazd area. The actual name of their little village at the time was Khooramshar, not Khooramshar, which is the city on the river in the far west of Iran, but Khooramshar, which was a small suburb in Yazd. Now Yazd is a city of at least 500,000 people. So there was a Sufi wali there, and Mundegar would visit him. And naturally, Shariar is his Persian pronunciation. Shariar would accompany his father. They were a poor family, and they had no formal education. At the age of 5, Mosaldun died, and the responsibility of raising Shariar went mostly to Peroja, his elder sister. Mundegar's work, his service, was to tend the local Zoroastrian Tower of Silence, the Dakma. The Tower of Silence is the way the Zoroastrians traditionally take care of their dead. They don't do cremations like the Hindus because fire is sacred to them. They also don't defile the earth with bodies because earth is also sacred. Erich had another way of explaining it. He said, if someone had absolutely no value in life, at least they were food for the vultures when they died. But if you've ever seen one, they're usually set on a hill and they have a large stone wall around them, rock wall, and there's a gate. So Shariar would accompany his father to the Dakma and stay there as he did his daily duty and tend the place. Shariar was a sensitive person, which means he was sensitive to spirits. So he spent his time, there weren't playmates there, but there were some spirits that he would play with sometimes. And he had no fear of anything because the spirits were just people who didn't have their bodies anymore. That's what he experienced. It was a natural thing for him. He grew up in that atmosphere. There was a story once where a girl died and they brought her body there just around sunset or after, and it was too late to do the ceremony that was not supposed to be done unless the sun was in the sky. So her body had to be kept there overnight, but to make sure that the vultures and other animals wouldn't drag the body away, somebody had to watch the body. And Mundegar had someplace else he had to be, so Shariar was given the responsibility of watching the body. And he was also tired, so to make sure that the body wouldn't be stolen, he tied his leg to the leg of the corpse. So if there was a pull on the body, he would wake up and chase the vultures away or the dogs away. And this was a natural thing for him. So you're getting the idea that he was a person who was really throughout life, he was fearless. He grew up in this atmosphere, watching this, and all the time, of course, he was naturally a bright person, but with no education. But the depth of that meaning, what's the purpose of all this? The meaning of life. People are born, and here they come, their bodies are gone, and now the spirit is there, and what's the whole purpose of this? So by the time he was about 12 years old, he had conversations with his father, and he told his father that he was intending to begin a life of seeking God, wandering around Iran. So he began this practice also at a very young age of repeating the Zoroastrian name of God, Yazdan, Yazdan, Yazdan. It became a deeply ingrained habit with him. So he left at the age of 12 and began wandering around Iran. He visited the places of the important tombs. He went down to Shiraz, the tombs of Sadi and Hafiz, and wandered in other places around Iran. That went on for some time. There's a story. He would beg for his daily food. He went to a shop, and the shopkeeper had pity on him and gave him some bread. But right behind him was an older fakir who demanded, "Why did you give it to him? I come here every day. This is my circuit. You gave the bread to him today?" He said, "Sorry, he looks like a sincere boy. I thought I should feed him." So this abuse went on for a while, and the older fakir said, "He's nothing but a beggar, and I'll prove it to you. I'll debate him. I'll challenge him with some questions." And the fakir put questions to Shariar, who answered the question more in depth than the fakir would know. And it went on and on like that. And eventually it was proven that he was a real dervish. So he became known as a dervish. As he wandered around, now the years going by, of course, he learned on his own how to write Farsi, and the Zoroastrians in Iran speak a similar language, but it's older, called Dari. Dari is the language of the Zoroastrians. It's also the language of the far eastern part of Iran, the western part of Afghanistan. Very old language. He also had a natural ability to pick up some other languages. So somehow he learned Arabic and Hebrew without studying. Baba explained this in later years by saying, everything in the mind is there. It's on record, but it's as if there's a curtain drawn, and this knowledge is unknown to most. But for the rare individual, he said, like my father, who had surrendered everything to God, that curtain was drawn aside, and those ancient languages were revealed to him. So I don't know how many languages he knew, but Urdu was also one of them. He picked up in India, which uses the Persian script. He spoke, as Mani said, he spoke Gujarati with the heavy Persian accent, and she would sometimes mimic the way he would speak Gujarati. This went on anyway until he was at the age of 20. He had done the wandering he could do in Iran for the previous 8 years, and he decided to accompany his brother Khordad to Bombay. So at the age of 20, they left to Bombay. Now he still has his habit. He didn't cut his hair and his beard. He's wearing a kafni. So he looks like a fakir from Iran. And he arrived in Bombay. Through his brother's help, he was able to secure employment. He worked for 5 months for this employer, but this person had no respect for who he might be. He just thought he was another clown. So he didn't trust him and he harassed him. But after 5 months, he accused him of being dishonest and cheating him. And Shariar was exasperated and he decided he was going to quit. So he quit, told his brother he's not made for all of this, and he's going to begin wandering and searching for God in India. So he took the money he had earned and got just a few simple things, including a staff and a wooden begging bowl, and probably some bedding in a bag, but no chappals, no sandals, no footwear, and started walking towards Karachi to the north, which is across, Kutch, an area in Gujarat, which is largely a swamp. There's a large desert area in Sindh, south of Karachi. It took him 4 months to walk to Karachi. He spent don't know why he went to Karachi. He spent about a month in Karachi and then left there to continue his searching through the deserts and forests and towns, wherever he just continued wandering through India. He would end up in a desert, and this is what he would explain in later years. He would end up in the desert, dying of thirst. The one story that is told is that at one point he was dying of thirst, and suddenly before him are standing two people, an old man with a beard and a younger boy. They each have a leather bag that has water in it. They give him a little water. He looks up and they're gone. He has enough strength to go a few more feet. He collapses again. They reappear, and this time they give him a drink. The old man admonishes him. Why are you doing this? Why are you out here giving the Almighty so much trouble? And he doesn't say anything, but he looks up again, they're gone. He realizes these are Abduls. Abduls are, the subtle conscious agents of the perfect masters who get sent on these chores to take care of seekers of God. The older man tells him, go ahead, continue in that direction. He comes across a hermit who just gives him gives him a loaf of bread without asking. And he eats some of it there, takes it with him, comes to a river and wants to cross it, but he can't cross it. A camel caravan comes and he asked them to give him a ride and said, do you have any money? He said, I have nothing. I'm just a fakir. I have no money. So they leave him there. So he sits and waits because he always had faith that God will take care of him. He hears a loud voice behind him. What are you doing here? It's a big man who says, just come with me. I'll show you where to go. They walk upstream and the man says, come follow me. There's suddenly a sandbar there. They walk across the river. He said, where are you going? I'm going to, well, come here, just hold my hand and listen and we'll go there. So he holds the hand of the man and they're walking and quickly walking. And the man is telling him things. And suddenly they come to a city. He's told to stay here. He'll come back later. So he stays there. The man never returns. And then Shariar starts questioning these people. They ask him, where did you come from? He said, I came from across the river. What? Today? Why, how far is the river from here? 60 miles. Oh, it only took a half an hour to get here. He's holding the hand of the other Abdul. So that means they were going about 120 miles an hour. Of course, it's not as fast as Baba's agent in Rome, Cristiano, who drove the sports car. He could go 200 miles an hour. So this is how he wandered, went through these experiences. He told Kaikushru Masa that during some times in the desert, he would just do this. He would be so exhausted. He would just do this, put his hands like this, and water would run into his hands and he would drink it. That's how he survived. He would just do this. There was a story. Once he wandered back into Gujarat and there was a river there. He had to cross. There was a muddy island there and people on one side said, don't go there. There's a ghost that lives there. He said, I don't mind ghosts. I don't mind him. I'll just meet him if I see a ghost. So somehow he makes it across to the island. But the problem was the island was full of brambles and mud and everything, and he couldn't get into it. But he finally barely could extricate himself from the mud. He was full of mud and he wandered up through the river to the other side. And there were some people there. He walked out and said, where's the town? And they all screamed, it's the ghost from the island. But in this way, he wandered around and learned a lot from different visiting advanced persons, yogis. He learned in his youth, he learned palmistry and astrology. He never practiced them for anybody else, but he knew those things. During the Blue Bus tours, a few times, like when they were way in the north in the mountains and near Quetta, Mani said Baba turned around and said to her one day, we're driving through here, but imagine Bobo walked through here looking for me. And again in the desert in Gujarat, when they were driving through, Baba told Mani, we are in a comfortable vehicle here driving, but remember, Bobo walked through here barefooted. He did this for about 10 years in India. And at the age of 30, he became desperate because he still hadn't fulfilled his longing to see God. So, of course, with his Sufi background, he knew of the Chilla. He would be Chilla Nashini, which means he would do the circle. So somewhere, it seems, in Rajasthan, probably between Ajmer and Jodhpur, somewhere there, he decided to do the Chilanashini somewhere near a river there. So he struck the circle around himself and sat, began sitting. And after a few days, the tormenting started. Apparitions, lion attacking, tiger circling around, fire, giants with red eyes and spears and different things like that. And then it was endless. In a way, this is what keeps a person from falling asleep, but it is not a pleasant experience. So after 30 days, he just couldn't do it anymore. So he got out and wandered to the river and collapsed. But as he collapsed, he heard the voice, "He whom you seek, he whom you long for, it is not your destiny to experience. But through your son will achieve it, and through him, you will get it." And this was a profound experience that changed his life. So after that, he rolled over and thought, what have I got to do with, I have no wife, let alone a son, and how is this going to happen? Anyway, he collapsed, slept for 3 days, and just got up and started walking towards Pune. He must have been in contact with his brother, who must have informed him that now his sister Piroja had also emigrated to India, and she was in Pune. So he walked to Pune, 400 plus miles, and met his sister. And they had an emotional reunion, but he didn't reveal to her all of his experiences. He was waiting to see what was going to happen. But her attitude was, that's enough of this for you. Why do you do this to yourself? Now you're 30 years old. Stop this. You could marry a nice Zoroastrian lady and have a family and be comfortable here. You've done enough suffering. He listened, went on, time went on, time went on. Of course, his restlessness came back. In about a month or so, he said, I'm leaving. This, I can't do this. Like, what is this? I can't do this. She was adamant, no, you have to get married. This is the only way for you. He wasn't against family life. He just felt like it wasn't fit for him. But somehow there was an argument with them. And to shut his sister up, he saw a young girl, 5 years old, walking by with a very young girl. The way she looked, innocent, energetic, and totally unfit for marriage. He said, okay. In other words, she was so innocent that he said, if I have to marry, I'll marry her. How's that? And his sister said, I think I can arrange that. It's the daughter of my best friend. Now, here's the difference that people don't understand is he wouldn't say, no, I'm just kidding, because the words left his mouth. The truth was so important to them. To speak words, you never did it flippantly. You couldn't even make jokes like that. Jokes had to be set up. You couldn't just say anything flippantly. He had said it in seriousness, but it was to shut his sister up. And this is what happened and how he was caught in his own sense of honesty. So Piroja went to speak to Golandun, her friend, and pleaded with her. Now, Golandun had met Shariar and really was impressed with him as being an authentic, honest, spiritual person. So, as Piroja explained it, Golandun, in her innocence, thought maybe this is not so bad. It could be good. And she assented and gave her word. So now two people have given their word, and now the way they are so honest, they couldn't go back on their word. But Golandun's husband, Dorab, was not the same. Now remember, Sheriar was probably older than Golandun. He may not have been older than Dorab, Shireen's father, but he was most likely older than Golandun. He had to be older than Golandun because the first child was only 8 years old at the time. So when Dorab came home and she informed him that now she had promised that Shireen could marry Sheriar, he just hit the ceiling, he hit the roof. It was totally not what he had in mind. Dorab was more like Shireen, practical and worldly. And he didn't see, even if the age was close, he didn't see that this was the right fit for his daughter. What was this guy going to do for the family? So that was his attitude about it. And this continued for years. Dorab did not attend the wedding of Shariar and Shireen. It was only after the children started coming that he was so impressed and how Shariar was so devoted that he realized that he was a good man. Up until that point, it didn't happen. Can we see now the next photograph, number 1? We only have 5 photographs of Sheriarji. Now, Shariar lives in Pune, so he becomes Sheriar. And this is him right there, the center. This is probably taken in the late 1880s or early 1890s. What he did was get employment so that he could support his family. Now, remember, his real, now by this point, some people know what's happening, but his real impetus was to follow the divine voice that had commanded him to have a family life. So he started by doing gardening, simple gardening, but he was very good at it, and his nature was so good, and that he became in charge of several gardens and had people who did the tending of the gardens under him. He was so good at it that even after he stopped gardening, some of the people who he had made gardens for asked him, please come and visit. Even if you don't work on our gardens anymore, we would like you to come and visit, because we know that even if you look at the plants, they will thrive. So he had that reputation. Shariar and Shireen got married probably around the time he turned 39 years old. She was at that time 14 and a half years old. Which is probably March, at the most, at the latest, early April, 1892. Let's go to image number 2. This is a photograph of Shariar and Shireen in 1893. This is their first child, Jamshed. He was born around New Year's, that is January 2nd. He was born January 2nd, 1893. So this photograph was probably taken sometime during mid-1893. So she is pregnant with Merwan, her second. Now, let's get the proper context of the story here. You've heard probably different versions, but what happened is she's now 15 years old and she has one son. By the time Merwan is born, she is still too young to deal with 2 children. So Jamshed is given in the care of her older sister, Daula. Daula at the time was 18 or 19. And Daula was married to Feridun, but they didn't have any children. So they were happy to have Jamshed to take care of, while Shireen had to take care of her new infant. And that is how this natural transition happened that Jamshed came to be considered the adopted child of Ferdun and Daula. Another thing to remember is that these sisters lived in close proximity to each other. I didn't have a photograph ready of Pumpkin House. Pumpkin House is where Sheriar and Shireen lived later, not during this time when they were first married, but a little later. But in that same neighborhood lived Daula and Ferdun. So they are known as Ferdun Masa and Daula Masi, and also Pendu's family, Masaji, Rustam Masa, Masaji, and Pila Masi. Her name was also Perosia. There are a lot of Rustams and Perosias, and so mostly you find they get nicknames. So we know them as Masaji and Pila Masi, Pendu and Naja's parents. They also lived in the same area. So the years went by. We know the stories of Baba's childhood, all the different things that happened. But Sheriarji immediately knew that Merwan was the one, because Shireen Mai also had some dreams when he was born, and she would tell Sheriarji the stories, and he knew that this was the special son from the beginning. So Baba explained once, why did he get born into the Zoroastrian culture? And he put it this way. The two extremes are Hinduism, which focuses on the many in the one, all the different gods manifested out of the one. And there is Islam. The Muslims focus on only the one out of the many. And he said Zoroastrianism was a balance between those two. So he was born into that culture that had an ancient balance. But why was it that these were his parents is another thing. Sheriarji was a true seeker. Baba had said many times that he was matchless. He was the one who had to be my father. Out of the whole world, only this man was fit to do that. And how is that? He was obviously a seeker of God, but he had no master. And per se, we could say he wasn't advanced on the plains. He had no master. But ages and ages must have gone by with his seeking, and always not quite his destiny to have a perfect master who would guide him. But he ended up here. He was like the archetypal seeker, longing for God, seeking for ages, who earned the right. So he earned this right to be the father of the avatar. So time went on. He taught Shireen Mai and his sons, specifically Merwan, Persian. And he would teach them by reading Hafiz. How Baba became so adept in the poetry of Hafiz and Rumi and all, because his father, that was their reading material. His father was focused on the Persian classics through the great Persian perfect master poets. So that's why Baba had this natural great depth. He grew up with it, and this great depth of the Persian culture and language and poetry. It perfectly fit the age. All these years from his start, Sheriarji was a vegetarian. But at one point, Golan Dun thought, this is too difficult. Iranis, they like to have some meat, fish in their diet. So she told Shireen, put some chopped meat, chopped mutton in the dal, today for Sheriarji, and it won't bother him. It's still rice and dal. So he, as he was eating it, he suddenly tasted the meat and noticed it in there, and he said, "What have you done? You don't know what you've done anyway. God forgive you. May God forgive you." And from that time, he just ate anything because his vegetarian vow had been broken by somebody else. So he realized that it was difficult in their house to make a special diet for him at the time. So he went along with it in that sense. He left the gardening and started a tea shop, a couple of tea shops. I don't know if you all remember the Shariar Cafe is in the Quartergate section of Pune, and not maybe a quarter mile away from where Baba House is. In the early 70s, it was still a good building. Gradually, they expanded the street, and I don't know if it's still there. It was hardly a closet left of it, but it still had a sign dangling there saying Cafe Sheriar. It was hardly anything left to it. They lived above that when Baba was a child. So until sometime in the first decade of the 20th century, they lived, that was one of the places they lived, above Cafe Sheriar. That shop was sold by early 1917, and within a few years, Sheriarji and Shireen Mai purchased that property that is Baba House, and Pumpkin House is right across from Baba House. That was all their same area, their same neighborhood. And so they were living in Pumpkin House when Baba Jan unveiled Merwan to his real status. And Merwan's room was the attic room above. That's where he lay for 9 months for the most part, wandering and not sleeping and not eating, at least much as we know. He would throw his food away, hide it, do whatever. That's what he did during that period. Of course, Shireen Mai was terrified that Baba Jan had put some kind of a spell on her son, because there were all types of different rumors about Baba Jan. Of course, Sheriarji knew that she was a great master. No record of his meetings with Baba Jan. He wasn't a person like, let's say, his brother-in-law Masaji, Pendu's father, who would go after these people and meet them and spend time in their company. His seeking was in the past, and he had his mission, which was to be the father and be the head of this family and encourage them. But for him personally, he'd already done that. What his devotion was in the later years was that he had a small prayer room there at home, and that was Baba's room. He would go there in that little room in front of Baba's picture and light a candle and pray. That was his life there. That was it. He didn't have to do anything flashy. That's what it was. Dedication to his son as his master. He was a kind and good man through his life, had this natural equipoise, fearless. After he sold the tea shop, he started toddy shops. And Merwan would assist him working in these toddy shops. You remember the history. Meherwan would assist him. He'd work a few hours a day, at least in the toddy shops. There also was a restaurant, the family that Ferdun Masa and Aldo Masi had. So they had businesses like this, little shops supplying things. Bobo, as he was known to the family, would sometimes have to stay late in the shop. And if it was winter, then Shireen Mai would make sure that he had a blanket, because sometimes he would stay there and just sleep there at night. So she wanted to make sure he had a blanket handy. But of course, there were poor people and they needed the blanket more than him. So he wouldn't just give the blanket away to people. And this went on and on. Shireen Mai would say, "Where's your blanket? Sharo, where's your blanket?" And he had given it away. So he'd give him another one. This went on and on. Of course, she ended up. Jal said she made this comment. If I had known how many blankets he would have given away, we could have just opened a blanket shop instead. Let's go to the next photograph. This is a great photograph. And we've tried to plumb it up and clear the focus as much as possible here. This is taken sometime around 1924. This is in the front veranda now of what is presently Baba House. Behind this wall is where we still enter to go into Baba House, I believe, unless it's right here on the right in the front. It's either behind or it's right here in the front. But this is the front veranda of Baba House, and around 1924. So you see Shireen Mai there on the left, then Mani with the Sola Topi, and Adi Jr. right there behind her with this big smile. There's Jal in the center, and this is their servant, and I'm not sure if that is their old original servant who was named Dondibai or not. He was Baba's childhood servant, but I'm not sure this is her. If it is, even her name is on the tower of the memorial tower at Meherabad. And this is Sheriarji at the time, 1924. Mani would say, you know, when she was little, she was precocious, and sometimes she'd get in arguments with her mother. And this is the only time she said her father would be upset with her. And upset means he would say, "Mani, don't argue with mother." But if she knew what the real limit was, and he might reach his limit, he would say, "Mani, Khodai thara bala khare," which means in Gujarati, "Mani, may God be good to you," which means you're kind of a brat, so may God be good to you. She would say. So even his scolding was in the form of a blessing. But to her, she had such respect for him that she knew it was time to stop. So that's how he would scold her. Sheriarji would visit Meherabad occasionally. He wasn't one of those people who would go all the time, but we know from the diaries that he would go from time to time. There would be record of when he would arrive and when he would go back. He would usually travel with one of the sons, sometimes with Shireen Mai or Mani, but he would come from time to time. Now, there was a period later in 1927 when Meher Ashram began on the hill, where he came to stay longer. Behram had come to live as one of the Mandali in July of that year. Behram was an occasional visitor. By the way, Behram is probably taking this photograph, and that's why we don't see him here. So Behram was an occasional visitor till July of 27. Then he came to stay as one of the Mandali. He was still young. Adi was taken in to be in the Meher Ashram also in 1927. And Shariar would come and spend more time there. Sheriarji came, for an example, in October. And he was, remember now, he was a celebrity amongst the Mandali. So what it would happen is people would pester him with questions, early history, your life as a fakir wandering through the wilderness we've heard about. Can you tell? It came to be such a thing that Baba said, okay, now he will give a talk for 1 hour on these days while he's here. So he was given a time slot to tell his stories so that if people wanted to interview him or hear his stories, they would have to come at that point and hear him. That was later in 1927. Next image, please. This is a few years after that. Sheriarji's business was quite successful. We had many toddy shops at one point. But as he was getting older, he let some of them go. And then when at about the age of 75 or so, he had a business partner, a young man who came to help him a few years before. And at one point, this young man approached him in the evening, talked to him in a friendly way, had something to drink and offered him some drinks and relax, funny stories, different things. And he said, you know, you're getting old and why do you want all this responsibility? Let me take some of this. He says, I've been thinking that we should procure some more toddy palm plantations for the toddy shops. Is that okay with you? Yeah, okay, whatever. So just sign this stamp paper here and I'll fill out the details. And Sheriarji, in good faith, trusted him and signed this. So what this partner, Mullag, did was to go and claim, fill in the details, that Sheriarji Mundagai Irani has bequeathed all of the business and its wealth to me. So then Shireen Mai found out about this and she was going to fight it tooth and nail, and they hired, with what cash they had, a lawyer to fight this whole thing. And she was really the one. Sheriarji was saying, it happened, it's God's will. She wasn't satisfied with that, so she wanted to fight it. So they hired a lawyer, and the lawyer would say, this is simple to resolve. Sheriarji, all you have to do is claim that you didn't sign it. Oh, I can't say that, I signed it. I signed this paper. Couldn't get him to lie. Well, then you will claim that he's a scoundrel, he's a this and a that. Whatever he is, he did this. Yes, it happened, but I did sign it. That's all I can say. The lawyer pleaded with Shireen Mai, please, at least, can you get him to stop being sympathetic to the man who swindled him? It was his nature. He would tell Shireen Mai, he loses, how he'll have to suffer in future births. It's not good for him. He should know that. Anyway, this went on for a few years. And eventually the judge who made the ruling in the case said, this man Mullag is obviously a scoundrel, but the fact remains, Sheriarji signed the document. It happened. So legally speaking, you don't have a leg to stand on. And he lost everything. They lost everything. And Money would tell the story, and she would remember when they came back from the court the final time, and her mother just kept her dignity and held her head up and just completely serious and silent, walked into the house, sat there. Now their son is Meher Baba, the master. He had people in Pune. He had followers in Pune who could have done something to save his own family from financial ruin. But it's interesting. At the time when the whole world, the late 1920s, 1929, just before then, at the time when the whole world was facing financial collapse, Meher Baba didn't spare his own family from that. And simultaneously remember that Kaikushru Masa was going through the same thing with his family. So this is how I say these people are archetypes in the avatar's work. Yeah, they suffer, but in the end, they suffer for a great purpose. It's not just about being comfortable in one lifetime. They suffer out of love. So Baba began traveling to the West in 1931. In 1932, Sheriar's health was failing. Before Baba left in late March 1932 for the second trip to the West, he visited Sheriarji in Pune. And not long after that, when Baba left to Italy, Sheriarji was taken to Bombay. Now, this trip in 1932, remember, it was a round the world trip, and Baba had specific work he was doing at this time. He sent several of his mandali to China. Jal was one of them. Jal, Vishnu, Gustaji. They were sent to China. Herbert Davy was there working at the time. So they had to be there for a specific time. Adi and Behram were with Baba, traveling from India to Europe to America and around the world that way. So all the sons were gone at the time. Sheriarji was ill. He was in the hospital in Bombay, and he finally died on April 30th. Yesterday was the anniversary. He died on April 30th, 1932. So Adi Sr., that is Adi Irani, was with Baba in the room. When that happened, it happened like this. Sometime in the night, Baba clapped, and Adi came in, and Baba made these gestures. Adi couldn't catch what he was saying. This means a beard, or a sign for an old man, has gone up. So the next day, the news came that Sheriarji had passed away. And then Adi realized what Baba was telling him, that Sheriarji had passed away and dropped his body. He consoled Behram and Adi Jr. by telling them, yes, he's gone now, but he's not gone in the usual way. He's really gone because he's been liberated. He's within me forever. He's earned liberation. Now let's go to the last photograph of Sheriarji. This is how he looked in his old age, those few years before he died. So he was a great inspiration. It was also proof to many people that Meher Baba had some authentic spiritual background. He wasn't some bum from some nowhere, although the avatar could do that if he wanted to. Having Sheriarji for a father was a proof to people that there was authentic spirituality there. Let's go to the last picture of the tombstone. This is an image of what is on the memorial at Mehrabad. On the hill to the west of Baba's Samadhi is a cemetery. And for those who had been memorialized in the cemetery, Baba had the stone placed. His mother, Shireen Mai, died on his birthday, that is February 25th in 1943. And sometime after that, Baba had this placed there. In this memorial is not their bodies, because what happened is when Sheriar died in Bombay and all the sons were away, the whole responsibility of taking care of his body fell on Shireen Mai and Mani. They were the two left there alone to deal with this. Baba's brother Khodadad was also there in Bombay. He was still alive. So Baba's brother was there, and I think Shah and Pulad were still alive then, Khodadad's sons. And so they helped. Everybody came back. His body was brought back to the Dakma, the Tower of Silence in Pune. So his body was interred there. And when Shireen Mai died, her body was also interred in the Tower of Silence in Pune. This memorial at Mehrabad is a large thing, but it contains Shireen Mai's spectacles that we see, all the photographs we see her in. She's wearing that pair of glasses. So it contains Shireen Mai's spectacles and Sheriar's snuff box, the silver snuff box that he had. In 1949, some months before the new life, Baba decided, and this is part of the coming, it was part of the coming definite end attitude with the new life. Baba had the Mandali decide whether they would have their bodies buried at Mehrabad, cremated, and the ashes interred at Mehrabad or somewhere else. And at that time, Najal opted that his body should be placed in the Tower of Silence when he died, as their parents were, and Behram opted for the same. So Jal and Behram's bodies were also interred in the Tower of Silence in Pune after they died. On the memorial tower, the names of Jal, Behram, and Behram's wife Shireen Mai were included as a part of Baba's old family disciples through that generation. This is the only group, 3 people who were included after Baba dropped the body by the then trustees. And that was because Adi Jr., his ashes are interred in the men's cemetery at Lower Mehrabad. And of course, Mani's ashes are interred just next to the Samadhi, first on the right at Baba's Samadhi as you face it on the hill. So to honor the rest of the siblings, because the other 2 who are on the list are Baba's sister Frani, who died at the age of 7, and of course, Baba's brother Jamshed, the eldest, who died a day after his birthday in 1926. So to include the rest of the siblings and the important persons in that generation of the family, the names of Jal, Behram, and Shireen Mai were also added on the memorial tower. Of course, Sheriarji and Shireen Mai were foremost in that list, very near the top, after I think Gustaji and Daulat Mai. And that about ends the story. Are there any questions?
I'll just put in the chat again, the way to raise your hand digitally. I can't see everyone to see if there's any hand raised, but I know Debbie's looking too. So if anybody has anything to
It's gone.
say,
Okay.
any questions for Peter?
Any questions about anything?
Yeah, Betty does.
Okay.
Thank the photos.
Peter, I heard you say Baba's brother Kodadad. Was that a mistake, or was it Sheriar?
Oh, I should have been Sheriar's brother Kodadad
Okay,
if I said
all
that.
right.
Thank you for clarifying that.
One more question.
Yes.
Who is Sheru?
Sheru was Behram and Pirinmai's eldest son. He was named after Shariar. And why is that? He had the same birthday. He was also born on Jamshedi Nowroz, March 21st.
Thank you.
Sheru never got married. He lived at Baba House his whole life. And he just sat at the door, very simple. And Mani would tell us, in the earlier years, he was handsome and he had a good voice, but he just he wasn't a worldly person. He wasn't interested. This was his yoga. Smoke a cigarette. Baba. Baba. That's what he would do. And we would see him. I would run into him and say, hello, I'm coming to Mehrabad in 2.5 months on June 17th. I'll be there in the afternoon. I'll see you then. How he was focused. Say hello to Padre for me, please. Thank you.
Peter Yasmin also has a question.
Yes.
Yes. Does anyone know the meaning of the name Shariar?
Shariar. Yes. Shar is, of course, king. Shariar, I think, is. Somebody can easily look it up. Go ahead. Do you know off the top of your head, Shariar? Oh, it's the Shah means king. Shar is one of Kodadad's sons was Shar. Also Shar, his name was. And he's sometimes referred to as Shah, but it's really Shar. Mani told me Shar, not Shah, Shar.
Yeah.
Jay Baba.
What about his languages? Did you talk about his languages?
I did talk about his languages.
Yes, I missed it.
Oh, by the way, about Sheriarji's knack for languages, Mani would say, it was so interesting that even the rabbis, that Pune has that big synagogue there. It's a prominent building. It's an historic, prominent marker in Pune. Beautiful red synagogue. And she said, when we still had a community of Jews living in Pune, the rabbis would sometimes come to ask Father questions about the meaning in Hebrew of certain passages in the Talmud. They would question him about Hebrew language. He must have known something.
Did he ever explain that, how he got the
Yeah, I
language?
already went through that. You didn't pay attention.
And I see Goher's hand is up.
Yes.
Okay, I cheated and I just Googled the meaning of Sheriar, and it says Sheriar name meaning is friend of the city monarch, king, or emperor.
Shar means king, and Yar is friend.
Right.
Yar.
Yeah, or great man of the city.
Yes.
It has multiple Islamic meanings. So, and the lucky number for Sheriar is 5. That's what it says. So, there you go.
That's great. Thank you, Goher. Mihal, go ahead.
Well, it was told so well, Peter. It was such a pleasure to hear and to feel your love for it also, your love for these tales. also in the video, and also now when you're doing live. And I also remember the movie that you made about Baba's father. And so it's really very, very beautiful. And it came from your heart, straight to the heart.
It's my joy to do it. Most of you have read these stories, but it's putting all the details, connecting the dots in one place. That's what we want to do. When we did God in Human Form, I wanted to begin with the story of Sheriarji because he represented humanity seeking. He was the archetypal seeker on behalf of all, on behalf of all humanity seeking God. He represented that. So I wanted to begin that. He represented that long period of longing for God between the advents of Muhammad and Meher Baba. Yeah.
Thank you for taking this history so deep and taking us all into it and the future into it also. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
And Meher Prasad.
Yeah, Peter, can you talk a little about Sheriarji's friend who dwindled him out of the business?
Well,
there's a story around that, right?
Well, I told that story. I can only tell you a little more, which is, I'll tell you two parts. One part is this. The first part is, in the early 20s, when Bob had visited Pune, this person, Mullag, had invited him to his brick factory in Kirki, outside of Pune, north of Pune. So Baba went and visited this man. And this is how he came to know Sheriarji and came into business with him. Now, the end of the story is this. Years later at Guru Prasad, there's one thing I forgot to detail. I need to tell you this.
Good you asked.
Yes, good you asked. I forgot to include this detail. After the court case was closed, Sheriarji sent a message to Mullag saying, I'm an old man and I won't live much longer. So I am forgiving you completely now. So that in the future, if you want my forgiveness and I'm dead, you don't have to worry. You have my forgiveness. Don't worry. Now it's only an issue between you and God. That's your business. That really reveals his nature. So the story goes on. Years later at Guru Prasad, I believe now Mullag is a man who is suffering on his deathbed, and he's been suffering for, I don't know how long, a long time. His family comes to Baba begging forgiveness for him at Guru Prasad. And Baba just Any more questions?
Yeah, Judy has her hand up. Go ahead, Judy.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for the
Hi, Judy.
Hi, for your wonderful presentation. Do we know if Sheriarji had any contact with any of Baba's 5 perfect masters?
Well, as I say, I'm sure he met Babajan. I'm not sure he went to Upasni Maharaj. I don't know if I'm sure he didn't go to Nagpur to see Tajuddin Baba. As I say, it wasn't, his purpose was given to him through his own efforts, and the role he had to play was there. And his devotion was in Baba's room when Baba wasn't there. Pray and light a candle in front of Baba's picture. That was it. That's the way he lived. And as Mani said, till the day he died, he had this constant habit. Yes, Don, on his lips. You couldn't hear, but you would see. She said you would see. Yes, Don. Yes, Don. Yes, Don. Repetition of yes, Don.
And would you please show us pages 3 and 5 of Baba's family tree that were referenced?
I'll ask Debbie to do that. Can you put this on? 3 and 5? Okay, let's see if we can get it for you.
Thank you.
Not 3 and 5, it would be 1 and, what did we show? 3. No, 1, 2 and 3. You need to see 2 and 3.
Okay. And while we're waiting, the huge Baba's parents' grave, or the tombstone, is quite large. So these two little, the eyeglasses and the snuff box are in a large hole over covered by the great stone.
Yes. I believe we might have one photograph of that dedication. Maybe a few, I'm not sure, but they would be in the archives.
Did Baba participate in the...
I'm not even sure if Baba was there, but I think he was, and I think he is the one who placed the items in. For some of those dedications, he was there, and for some he wasn't. I don't think he was. Nani was the first one. Ronald's mother, Nani Gailey, was the first one who had a larger memorial there, just near that area. So she was the first one. And it's interesting, even the placement of the cemetery. Baba had all this planned and way back years, from 1927, apparently. The site of the tomb, the placement of memorials, the cemetery, was all there. He just didn't tell anybody. But now we look back on it and say, well, that's exactly the distance. And so is that he determined it would be the space for the superstructure, and just naturally fell into the bounds of that. Just worked out. Placement of the hospital, placement of the wall, placement of the cemetery. They're all perfectly spaced away from the tomb shrine.
And did Nani pass in 36, was it?
39, October 39.
Did Baba participate in her funeral?
Yes, and he reminded them at the time that he said it's very rare that he would be there. What happened is not so much in her funeral. They had to go to see a movie. That was typical of Baba when somebody would die. Oh, good, now go and see this movie. I think Nani was another one who was given liberation. And, she was one of those persons who came into her association with Baba that didn't need to be ground to a pulp or humiliated or anything. She was just naturally, everything was for Baba. And she was just gracious and appreciative. And within a few years, 5 years later, she died and was liberated. So she was prepared in previous births for all of this experience. But they were at Bairamangala at the time. Baba was driving back, and he gestured to the Mandali that Nani is gone now. She had gone into a coma, and she had a breath about every minute, maybe at that point. But by the time Baba came back, she was basically dead. But it is said when Baba came back and he put his hand on her head, she exhaled one last time, and that was it.
And she was so elegant that for the years she lived at Upper Mehrabad, in her high heels, she came down gracefully from the upper floor and very, very steep steps that had
Yes.
to have been
Yes.
designed by a very tall man. Those.
Well, what happened, Pendu told me, if you look at it, and Pendu told me because we would discuss such details of construction and whatnot, and he said it was a real challenge to get that stairway past the library window. Couldn't block. Baba didn't want that window blocked. So they had to sneak it past, and to get the rise and the run properly done, it was very steep. And you notice in the photographs at the time, they didn't have a handrail on that steep stairway because Baba wanted it done yesterday in August 1938. So there was no time to do that detail. That detail was done some years later. What would happen, of course, every time Baba would go somewhere with the women who were staying at Upper Mehrabad, then a list would come with orders, usually written by money, saying Mehra wants this and Baba says that and such and such and such. So they would get a list of chores that they had to do while everybody else was away. So Padri, sometimes Pendu, would end up having to do this work at Mehrabad to make the necessary improvements and adjustments.
And you mentioned the Superdome. What is happening with that?
The superstructure, well, anyway, Ted has a good file. It's all been in typical Ted fashion, very carefully and tediously done in detail. All of his conversations with Money, Erich, other people, and all the Money had some direct experiences about what it was going to be. So all of that is there. There's a good file there on the details of what will be the superstructure.
Are you aware of what the trustees may be thinking about timeline in the future? Are we looking at?
Yes. That's it. You said it. Timeline in the future. Right now, they're just trying to stay afloat financially. So their hands are full with just trying to survive with Mehrabad as it is and keep it running. It's a big place, and until more people start coming, probably that will be the case. So there won't be a lot of development as far as I can see, but it was important to get the memorial tower done. And Ted really wanted to get it done because the Mandali, especially Erich, would tell him, this is one thing that Baba wanted, don't forget, repeatedly. And so Ted felt a responsibility. It was a great piece of work.
Yes.
It was really well done.
Yeah, as were the two films that you put out of the inauguration of it and then Ted's explanation of the process. It's wonderful that those are available to everyone.
That's good. People can get a good idea.
Yeah. Meher Prasad. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judy.
Any hope on the family tree? Has Debbie found that?
We're working on it behind the scenes, Judy.
I don't
know.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'll keep you updated.
All right.
Yeah, Meher Prasad, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Peter. Thank you for sharing all this information. It's really great to hear this. I was wondering, we hear about Shirin Mai's interaction with the early Mandali and so on, but we never hear about the early Mandali's interaction with Sheriarji. If you think about Papa Jessawala or Dr. Ghani and
as I say, he would, he was a very unassuming person. He was perfect humility. And there was association with him that was on the part of the Mandali great respect, not just because he was Baba's father, but because he was a sincere seeker who had paid his dues like very few people in his early life. And because he started at the age of 12, it wasn't like a teenager who just like blows his childhood and trying to have a good time, and then he has remorse and tries to pay for it. It was his yearning from the beginning to seek God. It was the only thing he was interested in. So they had great respect for him. And as I say, specifically, we know from the diaries that in 1927, they were so interested and fascinated with his stories that Baba assigned him an hour on specific days to talk, so that people wouldn't be constantly asking him the same questions over and over again. He could sit there and speak to them and then answer their questions. Yeah. Yeah.
You mean Sheriarji used to spend an hour every day with every week with the early Mandali?
Well, in 1927, specifically, all I can tell you is that, yes, then, I mean, for an example, he attended the 1926 birthday celebration for Baba at Mehrabad, February 18th. He was there for several days during that period. And of course, people would have been speaking to him then. But when Baba's birthday was celebrated in 1926 on that day, it is recorded that 50,000 people came to Mehrabad. 50,000 people came to Mehrabad. Of course, it would be impossible for Baba to give all of them darshan on that day unless they had done something like Wadia Park later in 1954, which Baba didn't do in those early days. But the way that Chanji writes is this: at least 50,000, it's estimated that 50,000 people came to Mehrabad, and at least they could get a sight of Shri. Yes. So, of course, here's another thing to remember. All of these personalities around Baba are great, but when he's there, everybody fades into the background. They're one of the crowd. And even for many people, the crowd disappeared. They could only see him. Do you have those family trees ready?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and share them now, Peter.
We saw number one. Do you want to show number one again? We'll just talk about it for a minute.
All right.
Okay, this is number one. And we started with this to show you, of course, Baba's family tree. As I say, Shariar was the third child, the second son. But we placed him here so that we could come down from Kodadad's line this way. So we have the brother who lived in Calcutta, who was the youngest. We don't know anything about him. Don't even know his name. Kodadad had these, what we know as three sons. Kaikushru was the one who died in 1918 in January. The story was that Sheriarji wanted Baba to go to the funeral to represent the family there. His brother's son had died. So there was a funeral there, and it was done the traditional Zoroastrian way at the time, 1918. But Baba was now realized and still coming down, so death didn't mean anything to him. So he went there, and all of these people mourning was not what Mehrbanji wanted to do. So what he did in the midst of the body being done this and all these people wailing and whatnot, he pretended to faint and dropped on the floor. And people were alarmed, and his uncle Kodadad Masa came there, and Kodadad Kaka came there, and they lifted the brothers, they lifted him and took him back. And because he said he couldn't pretend to be wailing because he knew that Kaikushru was not gone per se. He was still, so there was not, he couldn't make, the only drama he could do is to pretend to faint. And that got him out of there. So with the pretense that he was not feeling well and he couldn't take it, they shipped him back to Pune. So he was the eldest brother, and that's why we have his dates. The other two we don't have, but you see their names are on the memorial tower. Kodadad Kaka, he's 138 here. His son Shar and his son Pulad are there also. Now Kaikushru, apparently, this is my best guess, Kaikushru had a son Merwan. There are two Merwan Kaikushru Iranis who are a bit of a puzzle here. But through my conversations with Pendu, I've made the assumption that this Merwan is the son of Kaikushru, Baba's cousin. Because when Pendu explained this to me, he said, Baba's cousin Merwan. That was Baba's cousin. He didn't say our cousin. So Pendu is on the maternal side, not from the paternal side. So you see there's a number there. Debbie's saying that the memorial tower number is indicated on these. The memorial tower project is part of what prompted us to do this kind of family tree. And we've done it in pages to make it easier to follow. So now if we go on the other side, here's the interesting connection. Okay, Perosia was married and she had at least one daughter, Shireen, but we don't know who the other ones were because Perosia had a husband who died around 1904 or so. And Mani told me that Perosia returned. She never met Perosia, her aunt, because Perosia returned to Iran around 1905 after her husband died. But we know there was Shireen because Shireen had these children before she died. And Sheriarji always had his eye on the youngest one for one of his son's wives because she suffered a lot and worked hard as a child. After her mother died, her father got remarried and the stepmother was not very kind to them. So Pirine, who married Behram, was like Cinderella. It was a Cinderella story. And of course, Behram and Pirine are the parents of Sheru, Gulnar, and the twins, Rustam and Sohrab. I'm trying to say we don't have them here. They're on page 3. We'll see that later. Okay, so this is still page 1. So from Shireen, we see these people. And from Shireen's children, there is Rustam, Pirine Mai's brother. He is on the memorial tower, remembered. And Pirine Mai and Behram are also in that line. And these are cousins of Rustam and Sohrab, these bottom 2 lines here. Okay, now let's go to page 2. So this is the maternal grandparents. This is Dorabji and Golandunmai. So they have numbers. And their children all have numbers. You see Daula Masi, the eldest daughter. She was married to Ferdun Masa. They had no children. Again, Shireen Mai and Sheriarji are second. The third child is Dinsha. We know him as Dinsha Mama and Roat Mummy. And they lived in Karachi. They were the parents of Korshed, who married Jamshed, Baba's eldest brother. Korshed died after Baba dropped the body, but she was also one of the early women Mandali. Lived at Mehrabad, lived in Nasik with the women Mandali. Jamshed, Baba's brother, number 5, who died on February 26th, 1926, after the big celebration at Mehrabad for Baba's birthday. There now is at least one other sister, Temina. We don't know that much about this branch, except that these two are named here. And Hutaksi became the adopted daughter of Korshed later in life. And Hutaksi's adopted son, Merwan, we still see at Mehrabad. He comes to Duni every once in a while, not nowadays, but before the epidemic, the pandemic, he was coming there. Over here, we see Rustam and Piroja. This is Rustam Mama, who was Baba's, Shireen Mai's brother, Baba's uncle, who had the theater company, you recall, who Baba also worked in his theater company when he was still coming down. He was, these were all people who were dedicated to Baba. Okay, Piroja is the next one. She was the mother of Pendu and Naja. We know her as Pilamasi, and she married Masaji, and she was the most dedicated to Baba of those sisters at the time, though she died in 1917. And the night before she died, she was interested. Baba was still not considered a master then, but she asked Baba, when will you take me to Pasi Maharaj? Tomorrow, Masi, tomorrow I'll take you to Maharaj. And she died. Masaji is there, number 8, Pilamasi, number 9. And you remember Masaji's grave is the foundation of the memorial tower. It was because his grave and his body was buried there that the memorial tower is on that site. Baba picked that site. And as it turned out, it is exactly in between now the railroad track egress and the new highway egress, which we had to move to the west. But the memorial tower park fits perfectly in between the two. So it worked out perfectly. Again, the placement of objects at Mehrabad worked out perfectly. Of course, we know Pendu and Naja. There were 2 siblings that died very young. Pendu's buried in the men's cemetery. Naja's ashes are interred next to Mera's near Baba Samadhi. The youngest sister was Banu, and she was married to a man named Kodadad. His number is already also on the memorial tower. I think Banu lived till after Baba dropped his body. Her name is not there. They also lived in Karachi. So Dinshaw and Rawat and Banu and Kodadad lived in Karachi. The rest of them lived in Pune for the most part, and other places, but mostly in Pune.
Peter, do we know anything about Pila Masi and Masaji's other 2 children, Mera and Gustad?
They were died at a very young age. We don't know if it was infancy or as toddlers, but at a very young age. You see Banu and Kodadad's children, the 3 middle sons there, Rashid, Merwan, and Homi, were all students in the Meher Ashram. Baba would stop in Karachi occasionally to visit his aunts and uncles there. If he was passing through, he would visit them. Let's go to page number 3. So now you can see we're up to date. We're taking the direct descendants of Sheriarji and Shireen Mai. So Jamshed was the eldest. He was married to Korshed, who's on the previous page, a first cousin of theirs. They had no children. Merwan, Meher Baba. Franny died at the age of 7. And when she died, she said, "Mother, I have to go now. The white horse has come for me." Which is interesting, you know, the Hindu lore of Kalki Avatar and the white horse. She died also in an epidemic. Jahangir died very young. Jal, we knew Jal. He was born in 1902, September 15th. Behram was next, 1908. Now, we think Sherman was born in 1910, but he may have been between Jal and Behram. I'm not sure of that. But Behram was there. He married Perrine, first cousin once removed from the previous page. And Mani is the youngest, born December 15th, 1918. If we go down, we see that Behram Irani's children are here. Sheru, the eldest, who I told you about, Gulnar, who married Changu Sukadwala. They were all very dedicated to Baba, and their children who are still alive, which we don't include birthdays now, so nobody can harass them. So Mehrnaz married Arvind. They're there, still living at Baba House, and Merwan Sukadwala, who lives, as far as I know, he's still in Arizona. Rustam and Parveen are there. And I hope you can see the bottom of the page that I can't. Rustam and Parveen's children are not included here right now, but they have a son, Mehrdil, and a daughter, Shireen. Going over here, Adi Jr., he married Gulu, and Gulu, her number is 228. She's Adi's first wife. She died while Dara was born, just after Dara was born. She died. And it was a day after the memorial tower was dedicated. So she was the first candidate for the new list, the expanded list. So Gulu was the next person on the list. So they had one son, Dara, who we still know. Dara is still there at Mehrabad. Adi got married again to Franey, who is a niece of Sarosh. And they have one daughter, Shireen, who lives there in New Mexico with her husband, Jay. And they have a daughter, Mara. Dar and Amrit have two sons, Merwan, who lives here in Asheville, and his wife, Molly. And then out of my picture here, oh, there it is. You see Jamshed and Farah, Jamshed married Farah. Okay. Sorab and Shanaz are here. Sorab and Rustam are the twins. Sorab married Shanaz, and they have two daughters, Mehrose, who married Minu Hamilton, and Dilruba here. Okay, that's it for the family tree. There are 24 people on this expanded family tree who are remembered on the memorial tower at Mehrabad. That's a big group.
Thank you, Peter. Well, there are a few hands up, but I know we don't want to wear out our welcome here. So let's maybe just these two, and then we'll close if that's okay. All righty. Let's see who's up here first. Is Judy? Go ahead, Judy.
Hi again. Peter, just a couple of points. Something that both Kaikushru, Korshed's father, and Baba's father, Sheriarji, have deeply in common is that they came into this life wanting only God. And that is something that Korshed used to emphasize so strongly every time she would speak about her father, and especially the story of his doing the circle. It was never for the point of actually becoming wealthy. He felt he had a worldly responsibility because his family had arranged in marriage that he was in, and then he hadn't yet had children, but he wanted to be free. He wanted to fulfill that responsibility, but then be free to look for God. And that's something that's so,
yes,
I think one of the
that's
deepest
true.
things in common.
That's true. The difference is between them, they both had spiritually altruistic motives, no doubt about it. Kaikushru Masa had that responsibility of the family, and so he defined it. Like Mani would say, you have to be a lawyer with God. So he defined it. He says, I need money so that I can be rid of this responsibility and focus on God. That's altruistic. Sheriarji said, God, whatever. It's God's will. That's a slight difference. A slight difference. And you see, it can be interpreted to say, because of Kaikushru Masa's motive to say I should have this money to do this, he paid the price for it. He really did. He suffered horribly because of that thing. But don't say that's a question of good and bad. It's a question of destiny. At that point, it's all destiny. It's the balance sheet of sanskaras and the destiny. But they're so close to the end that these stories are exemplary stories that are meant to inspire people. They are not typical people. They're in the end game. They're the shooting stars. They're meant to inspire people.
And one last detail, the figure of 50,000 people that attended Baba's birthday celebration in, was it 1926?
Yes.
At Mehrabad. Do you feel that that's accurate, or was Chanji actually, like more than anybody could have imagined?
No, he was, he tried to be objective about it, but his diary entry goes on for pages and pages. But Baba gave darshan starting at, let's say, 9 in the morning till about noon, where they had to stop for a while because Baba's cabin on the Sai Darbar platform was buried in flowers. Okay, and they had to clear that away and start it again in the afternoon. I'm not sure Baba had any lunch. The Mandali had their first real taste of what this mass darshan thing was, when most of them spent their days locking arms to be a human chain to keep the crowd from hysterically just mobbing Baba. And Baba was carried up the hill. He agreed to be carried up the hill. The women up the hill at the time, remember, there was only the tank was there. There were no doors in the side or anything. The tank was there. But the women, led by Gulmai, did Baba's arti on the hill. And then they made the usual round to Arangaon and came back, and Baba continued giving darshan. He didn't stop giving darshan till after midnight. And so most of those people had to go away without darshan. Now, the people who were insistent upon having darshan slept at Mehrabad overnight. And we have one photograph of the next morning when Baba continued giving darshan, leaning his back on the wall of the table cabin, which was there near the Dooni, beneath, in the shade of that tree by the Dooni that still exists there. Baba gave darshan at that spot. We have one photograph. So in all of that big mass of chaos, nobody had a camera. Now they learned their lesson. So the very next year, when Baba's birthday was celebrated at Mehrabad, exactly a year later, I believe both Rustam and Naval Talati had cameras, and they took some nice photographs. We have some nice photographs of Baba for that event. But Baba didn't want a big crowd that year. In 1926, he said, bring them on. Okay, let's have it. And Baba personally worked a lot with the Mandali to do the preparations at Mehrabad. A lot of labor. That's when Sai Darbar was completed. The stage was completed. Sai Darbar was completed by about New Year's. The stage was completed by the end of the month. They had rehearsed a play in the life of Shivaji that they were going to do. It was an atmosphere at Meherabad. Those were the days at Meherabad. The first long stay. It was.
Yeah.
What a time. Anyway, Sheriarji was there for that week or so during that time. I'm just thinking, I know they were. Chanji writes that they worked for weeks and weeks anticipating the need, but when the time came, they were woefully short in preparation. They didn't have parking areas. He said there were a dozen vehicles back and forth all through the day, bringing people to and bringing people away from Meherabad as fast as they could. And at least if they couldn't have the ashram, thing was to have a site of Meher Baba on his birthday. So they were doing that. It's quite a time.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
One last hand, Meher Prasad. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm wondering Sheriarji's sister Piroja and her relation with Baba. It seems like she had a big role to play in Baba's birth. So I'm wondering whether she saw Baba and believed in him, and what was her relation with him.
Well, as I said, Mani told me that Piroja went back to Iran about 1905, and she never met her, and she must have died, I think, sometime in the second decade of the 20th century. So whether she knew anything of Baba's condition, I don't know. But with somebody who has that close a connection, you know that in her next life, she would have been connected. I feel sure of that. That's all I could say it as a conjecture. So though she didn't live long enough to have direct contact with her nephew as Meher Baba, I believe because of that connection, she would have the connection in her next birth. Yeah.
Okay, so, but she never saw Baba.
Well, only as a child. She would have seen him as a boy. She would have seen him up to the age of 10, 11. Maybe she saw Merwan up to the age of 11. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Maybe just a moment of silence and then we can all.
Okay.
Okay. Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Peter.
Wonderful. Very wonderful.
Thank you, Peter.
Debbie, thank you
My
for all
pleasure.
your help. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.